Gateway to Hell by Melinda Kusira, Book 1 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy, Part 9, Chapter 35, The Price of Escape. As Garen waited for the Versati to tell him what the price of their aid was, he listened for the guards. But the door and the cell walls must be thick, because only muffled sounds reached his ears when he listened hard. That was good. If he couldn't hear them, then they couldn't hear him, and that was exactly what he needed. Now he just needed to know what Entali wanted for their help before the guards checked on them, and found no healing happened yet, because that would be hard to explain. Entali finally caught his eyes, and there was an emotion in them, but he didn't recognize it. What were they thinking?
I want to meet the sleeping angel.
Since he intended to find the sleeping angel and meet her, that was an easy request to grant. Garen nodded. I think I can arrange that. Should he mention that the sleeping angel told him to find her and wake her up? Maybe he shouldn't say anything about that just yet, since he didn't know what lay behind this request. After all, he didn't want to anger the person who could help him get out of there.
Do you promise?
Entali stared at him, and their glowing eyes seemed to bore into him. Yes, I promise to take you to the sleeping angel as soon as I can arrange it. But first, can you do something about my bruised and battered body? After all, you'll need me in top physical shape to get out of here. Garen waved to the gash on his hand, but he had other bruises too from his last incarceration and escape from this place, but his clothing concealed them.
Of course, but it will hurt. My kind aren't healers. We can just share some of our shape-changing power and use it to mend things, but it's not a pleasant experience.
Entali raised both hands, and they glowed with pinkish light. I know. This isn't my first time, but I appreciate the reminder. Garen braced himself. I heard this place blocks magic. I guess it doesn't block yours.
The spells on this place block active magic, but not passive gifts like enhanced senses or the sharing of one's gift. You'd better sit down.
Entali shoved him down onto the cot. I forgot how rough you can be. Garen laughed to cover how much he liked that. Before the whole war in heaven and his fall to hell, he was too big at 9 feet tall and too strong for anyone to push him around. Once stripped of most of his powers, he shrank down to just a shade under 6 feet, and most of his dense musculature wasted away, leaving him with a more compact, leaner body better suited to the arid plains of hell and all the running he did from more powerful creatures. But that change came with some benefits he hadn't previously considered, and now wasn't the time to think about them either. Keep your mind on the plan. But the plan hovered so far back in his mind that it took a moment to call it up and check off the line item for gaining an ally.
I'm not rough. I'm practical. Either you lay down or you fall down. Only one of those options doesn't create more damage to fix. I assume we're on a tight timetable, so we need to make this quick.
Entali rested one glowing hand on his forehead and one on the wound in his hand, and pain lit him up. Entali leaned so close their veil touched his face as they whispered in his ear.
You should scream. The guards are probably listening for that, so you'd better give them a show. Otherwise, they'll come in before we're ready for them.
Good point, Garen whispered back. Then he screamed like his skin was on fire and his muscles were liquefying, because that was how it felt. He kept imagining his body melting like a wax candle.
It's done.
Entali removed their hands and stepped back, giving him space to breathe, but the pain didn't vanish. Garen lay on the cot, twitching from the forced healing for a moment too long, because the bolt drew back with a loud click, and the door opened.
Are you done yet?
Asked a guard from outside the cell.
Not yet. The prisoner needed a breather.
Entali cast their eyes down as they glided toward the door, and the guard peering in through the gap between the door and the wall.
I'll bet a strong, virile demon like you wouldn't need a breather.
Entali modulated their alto voice so every word was a caress.
Of course. I'm not a weakling. That's why I'm the guard, and that sad excuse for a prisoner is an inmate.
Yes, you're so strong, and I'm so bored waiting for him to recover for the next treatment. Will you entertain me?
Garen couldn't see Entali bat their eyes at the guard, but they must have. The Versati knew how to get a rise out of demons, and it sounded like they planned to seduce the fool enough to get him into the cell. I hope his uniform fits me.
No one will notice if you step inside for a few minutes, and I need a recharge to continue. Won't you help me out?
Entali asked in a warm and inviting tone as the door opened wider, paired with a come-hither glance and a dose of pheromones that should wreak havoc on the guard's control.
What about the prisoner?
He's too out of it to notice anything.
That was his cue to look like a fool. Garen stuck his tongue out, stared at his nose until he was cross-eyed, and hoped he looked like he was so far gone nothing outside his skull registered. He'd never indulged in anything that could impair his faculties because doing so was dangerous when you lived forever and collected enemies. But he saw enough people who did to emulate their loose-limbed look.
Then I guess there's no reason not to indulge.
The guard stepped inside and closed the door.
Chapter 36, Chaos at the Timeline. The metal creature squeezed his arms as Avarian struggled to break its grip.
You can't escape us. Your uncle chose chaos and you will too. It's inevitable.
No, it's not. Ivarian said, because anything the creature wanted couldn't be good for anyone. But in reality, he didn't know what it was talking about. There were 5 elemental forces, and chaos wasn't one of them. Mom would have mentioned that if it was. When the light faded, cold air settled on his skin like a warning. But the ground wasn't underfoot, just air. Are we flying? Snow pelted him and the wind whipped past Ivarian as white light shone below in a long, straight line. It must be the arrow of time.
Where's the spell your uncle gave you?
The many voices of the agents of chaos asked almost in unison, and the question sent a chill through him. But they couldn't know what happened to the spell. No one was there in that ruined city with him and his uncle. They can't know that Uncle Hithoglier gave me the spell. Maybe I can bluff my way out of this. Ivarian hoped so because he couldn't give the creature what it wanted. Why do you think he gave it to me? I'm just his nephew, and I barely know how to use my magic. He wouldn't give me the spell you're looking for, or any spell for that matter. Ivarian tried to blank his face, so none of his thoughts showed when the creature turned him to face it.
Nice try, but we saw him give it to you. We know you have the spell. What did you do with it?
The agent of chaos shook him as the snowy ground sailed by far below them, but it didn't have any wings, so how could it fly? The metal centaur galloped through the air, as if it were as solid as the ground when it definitely wasn't. How could it do that? Ivarian hung in its grip, shocked by what it said. How could you see that? No one else was there except me and my uncle.
No, you two weren't alone. We were there too. What did you do with the spell? Did you take it to the past?
The agents of chaos shook him again. Below its metal hooves, a giant, upright wheel made of ice turned, and the snow blew around its base. The creature angled its trajectory toward the arrow of time, and they descended. If it knew his uncle gave him the spell, then why didn't it know what he did with it? It must not be omnipotent. It only knows what it sees, and it said it had difficulty moving around the timeline after its transformation. What was this creature before it became a rider of the apocalypse and a metal centaur? Ivarian didn't think it would answer that question, so he shoved it aside because it wasn't important.
What did you do with it?
The agents of chaos's hooves struck the permafrost covering the arrow of time, and it slowed to a canter. I did what my uncle asked. I hid the spell in the past, and that was even true because he hid it before he came here, and that moment was now in the immediate past. Of course, it wasn't where his uncle told him to put it, but that was beside the point. The spell was safely tucked into a hole in a wall in Ran and Mirren's apartment, and there was no safer place for it than there. Ran wouldn't let just anyone into his home, and he certainly wouldn't let anyone feel up his walls, looking for loose stones or places to hide things. Fear knifed through Ivarian. What if it knew? What would the creature do when it didn't find the spell? Why did you involve them, Uncle Hithoglier? Was his uncle working for the agents of chaos or with them?
Let's find out.
The agents of chaos leaped off the arrow of time. As they fell, the arrow towered over them. It couldn't know where his uncle wanted him to put the spell because Uncle Hithoglier didn't know himself. He just gave some vague instructions to take it 16 years into the past. Ivarian shivered at the implication. The agents of chaos skidded on the snow when they reached the ground and trotted over to the marks along the shaft of the arrow of time.
Let's see if you're telling the truth.
Yes, let's check that. Ivarian leaned hard to the side and touched a notch on the arrow shaft marking a year. He had one shot at this, and he hoped it would work. When his fingers touched the notch, an ice shelf shot out of the arrow of time and slammed into the side of the agents of chaos, and the metal centaur let go. Oh, thank God! Ivarian rubbed his arms as the ice shelf extended and pushed the metal centaur far from the arrow. The horizontal shaft of ice was half as wide as he was tall and at least a mile long and still going. Ice crystals as large as his head formed along it, and images of important events flickered inside them. In one ice crystal, an insectoid humanoid hovered in the center of a maelstrom as a giant eye-shaped light floated in front of him. Next to that, a man with gray wings and glowing violet eyes slashed at the blinding white rays of another eye-shaped light falling toward a fortress on a burnt orange plain. Lightning bolts shot between the ice crystals holding those images. What does that mean? Mom never mentioned that. I wish I asked her more about this place. But he never wanted this power or thought he'd ever need to use it, but now he did, and he didn't know what to do. Ivarian bowed his head and hunched his shoulders in defeat as the clip-clop of metal horseshoes crunching through the ice signaled the agents of chaos' return. I can't let it catch me again. Ivarian ran back to the arrow of time and touched another notch, and another after that. The crash of magical ice into metal and the scrape of the agents of chaos along the permafrost as 2 more ice shelves shot outward at breakneck speed signaled his attackers were out of commission for the moment. But that wasn't good enough. I need to get them away from this place. How could he do that? What time would be safe to send them to? I wish I knew where their place in the timeline is so I can send them back to it. After all, they shouldn't be able to do too much damage there.
What are you doing?
Hyrule appeared in the blowing snow ahead. Ivarian froze. The last time he saw his cousin, Hyrule threw him into a long, dark tunnel. What would he do this time?
Look out behind you.
Hyrule pointed, then manifested an icicle. He threw it at the metal centaur galloping at them from above, and it struck the centaur in the gears in its chest. The metal centaur seized as lightning flew out of the wound and jogged across its torso. How did you do that? Ivarian asked as Hyrule grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the metal centaur tumbling toward them. The creature fell into a gorge, but that wouldn't stop it for long since it could fly. This would only delay it.
Time magic is part of air magic. And you know what else is part of that family of magical gifts? Weather magic. And I just so happen to have enough to generate some ice in whatever shape I choose.
Hyrule strode away from the arrow of time and towed him in his wake. How do we get that thing away from here? Ivarian tugged on his arm, but his cousin wouldn't let go.
We send it somewhere it can't do any damage.
Hyrule crunched through the ice-crusted snow. Ivarian had a bad feeling about this, and it twisted his stomach into cold knots of dread, like a dead timeline.
Precisely.
Hyrule didn't glance at him or even acknowledge what he did the last time they went there. You're not even going to apologize for what you tried to do to me. Ivarian wrenched his arm free. A dead timeline might be the safest place to send the agents of chaos, but could he trust his cousin not to double-cross him again? Is he even my cousin? All I have is his word on that, but that's hardly proof. Part of him didn't want to be related to Hyrule at all. The man was mad. Ivarian rubbed his arm and scanned the snowy plain, but the metal centaur must still be in the gorge. It wouldn't stay there for long, though. Hyrule stopped and ran his hands through his white hair, perhaps in frustration.
I'm sorry about that. It wasn't my finest hour, but I'm over it now, and I don't blame you for not trusting me.
That was probably as close to an apology as he'd get, so Ivarian nodded. I accept your apology, but I still don't trust you.
Then don't. Just follow me so that thing follows us. It's after you, not me.
Hyrule hiked onward until a giant snowball rolled in front of them and spawned a bulbous head and limbs. The snow creature extended his hand in a stop gesture.
Halt, Time Walkers, you can't go this way.
More snowball creatures rolled in behind the first one. The snowy guards blocked their route with their massive limbs. Ivarian eyed the snow creatures. What are they aside from the obvious? They were probably guards of some sort, but Mom never mentioned them or any guards in this place. Either she left them out deliberately, or she never encountered them. I wish I knew which.
They guard this place and keep people like us away from dead timelines. At least that's all they've ever done while I was here. If they do anything else, I'm not aware of it.
Hyrule shrugged and trudged toward them like they weren't blocking his path. Shouldn't we find another way? Ivarian stayed put as more giant snowballs rolled toward them. How many of those things were there? What could they do?
No, this is the fastest way. That's why they're blocking it.
Hyrule extended both hands and ice flew from them in a frosty stream that solidified into an icy ramp over the snow creatures. They bounced on their snowball bodies and struck the underside of the ramp with their heads. But Hyrule generated more ice to seal the cracks as he slipped and slid up the ramp.
Come on, we don't have much time.
What happens when we run out of time? Ivarian shoved his misgivings down where he couldn't feel them anymore and hurried after him.
Are you going somewhere?
The agents of chaos said in that buzzing voice that was slightly out of sync with itself as a metal arm hugged his ankles and yanked his legs out from under him. Ivarian crashed into the ice bridge, and it cracked as he slid over the edge. Sharp icicles pelted his captor, but it just laughed as it galloped on the wind, straight into the arrow of time. The world whited out as the currents of time grabbed them and hurled them back into the timeline. Which year did the agents of chaos pull them into?
Chapter 37. Impatiently Summoning. When Rand stopped drawing glowing circles, he just sat there surrounded by them. He didn't say anything either, which was weird because he was quite talkative. Rosalie bit her lip to keep from asking any of the questions bouncing around her skull. She didn't want to interrupt him, not after all the effort she went through to convince him to do this. But the waiting might drive her nuts if something didn't happen soon. She fidgeted where she sat on the couch. How much longer would he just sit there doing nothing? I need to be patient. But patience wasn't her strong suit, and it took all her willpower not to get up and pace. I can't just sit here and do nothing. I need to do something. Rosalie fiddled with the glowing threads she collected and unbraided them just to do something. I should make something to bind Ivarian in case this works. No, not in case it would work. She was as sure of that as she was of her own name. Then I should let him work while I work on my project. Now she just needed to figure out how to construct a binding spell to keep a time walker in this time period, but do it in a way that she could remove it when necessary. Now that was a puzzle, and she set her mind to it while Rand stared off. But that mystery only distracted her for a little while. Then she ran out of patience again and pocketed the glowing threads, even though no one could see them except her. Is anything supposed to happen? You've been sitting there and staring off for at least an hour now, maybe two. Rosalie asked when the bells of Mount Eredrin rang again, marking the hour.
I don't know. I've never done this before.
Rand shoved his fingers through his hair, messing it up. But your uncle said. Rosalie pointed at Mirren. He still sat on the couch next to her, watching his nephew.
I know what he said, but summoning my aunt is different. I just call her name and she appears. I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't do anything to summon her except say her name. But I don't think that'll work for your boyfriend.
Rand let his hands drop into his lap. He's not, oh forget it. Rosalie didn't want to argue about that again, not when Rand was trying. She felt like throwing her hands in the air in defeat, but she refrained because that might distract him.
Hey, I'm sitting right here.
Mirren waved from where he sat on the couch.
Don't talk about me like I'm not in the room.
I'm sorry, Uncle Myron.
Rand bowed his head to hide his smile. That Buster. He just loved getting a rise out of people. Me too. Rosalie folded her arms and slumped against the couch. If the waiting didn't do her in, then her temper might.
What did your dad do?
Mirren drummed his fingers on the arm of the couch.
He drew circles on the ground with his magic, which I did already, and the Queen of all trees would just appear like magic. If he did anything else, I don't know about it. He wasn't very talkative, if you remember.
Rand gestured to the glowing circles surrounding him.
That's true. But I remember he infused those circles with his magic after he created them as well. That was his answer to everything.
Mirren rose and stretched his arms above his head.
Maybe we should pack it in for the night and try again in the morning when we're all fresher.
Wait, why did Dad think more magic would help? I'm not following that part.
Rand stared at the circles.
I don't know. Your dad had a lot of magic and his answer to everything was to throw more magic at it until he got the result he wanted. In fact, you used to encourage him to do that.
I did?
Rand furrowed his brow in thought.
Throw more magic at it. Ha, that's not a bad idea.
Rand rubbed his chin, and he looked deep in thought. Maybe he found the answer finally. Rosalie crossed her fingers and the spell in her pocket crinkled loudly in the sudden hush that fell over the room. Should I show him the spell? She rested a hand over her pocket as uncertainty gripped her. No, that spell required a child and there wasn't one here. Nor would she doom one when Rand could do this without involving anyone else. He just needed to use his wish magic, but if she suggested it, he would refuse as he did every time she'd brought that up already. How can I convince him to do something without coming out and saying what I think he should do? Rosalie rose and paced in front of the couch. Can't you just?
No, I don't know what that would do to him. I'm going to sit here until I figure out how my dad would have summoned him safely.
Rand pointed at the glowing white circle surrounding him. How long will that take? Rosalie rubbed the heel of her hand over her stomach. Dread knotted it more with every passing hour. She didn't know how she knew Ivarian was in trouble, but she felt it like a cold hand squeezing her stomach.
I don't know, but it'll go a lot faster if you leave me alone.
Rand glared at her. Rosalie decided not to take that hint. She dropped onto the couch again and folded her arms. I'll just sit here. I won't say a word.
I find that hard to believe.
Believe whatever you want. I'll sit here until you bring Ivarian back. I'm just here for moral support.
Of course.
Rand rolled his eyes, then closed them.
Are you going to push more power into those circles? That's what your father would do in this situation.
Mirren examined the circles instead of meeting the annoyed glare his nephew sent his way. I just said the same thing. Rosalie tapped her foot to keep from saying that aloud and ruining the détente. Why was it okay if Myron said it and a big deal when she did? Men are so weird.
Yeah, I'll try that now.
Rand sighed and his hands glowed white with his magic as he leaned forward until he could touch the outermost circle that bound all the other ones inside its shining girth. White light shot up from the floor, turning him into a silhouette that rose and staggered out of the luminous columns. Is it working? Rosalie sprang off the couch and crashed into Rand's back.
It might be. I've never done this before.
Rand spread his arms to keep her from going around him or disturbing the spell. As if she would ever do that when she finally got what she wanted. Now what? Rosalie asked when the light didn't do anything except illuminate the ceiling.
I think we could use a wish right about now. What do you think?
Mirren glanced at his nephew.
Yeah, you might be right. Rosalie, would you like to do the honor since you're so concerned about Ivarian?
Rand stopped blocking her and stuffed a hand into his pocket. When he pulled it out, he presented her with a white rock. Did he carry them around in his pockets? Sure. Rosalie took the rock from his hand. What do I do now? If you say, just wish for him, I might kick you. Rosalie bounced the rock on her palm. When he didn't answer, she glanced at him, and her brows rose in dawning understanding and surprise. Wait a minute, you want me to wish for him now after you argued about why you wouldn't do it? What changed your mind?
Well, nothing else I tried worked, so maybe this one time it'll be okay. But just to be clear, if he arrives in pieces and bleeds all over the carpet, you're cleaning it up, not me.
Rand dropped onto the couch and folded his arms.
We'll all clean it up. It'll be a team effort.
Mirren patted his nephew's arm. Now that it came right down to it, her gut twisted in worry and a little fear. Is that a real possibility? Rosalie turned the rock over and over on her palm, but it was just a white stone as large as her thumb.
I don't know. I only wish away the demons, and I don't know where they go when I send them away. But I never tried it on a person, so I don't know what will happen. That's why I avoid it.
Rand shifted on the couch like his conscience pricked him too.
It might be fine though, so stop borrowing trouble and let's try it.
Mirren nodded for her to go ahead. That was all fine for him to say since his life didn't hang in the balance. But what did she have to lose? Ivarian wasn't here, and she needed his help to fix things. But he was off somewhere, and whatever he was doing wasn't fixing anything. So really, how worse off would she be if this went wrong? Rosalie tossed the rock into the air and caught it. So I just wish for him to return.
Yes, then throw the rock into the middle of the glowing circles.
Rand waved to them. Will they help? Rosalie turned the rock over on her palm.
They always help my dad, so they should help us summon Ivarian.
Okay. Rosalie took a deep breath, then closed her eyes and squeezed the rock in her hand.
Don't forget to picture your boyfriend. My magic is very visual.
Must you keep teasing her?
Yes, I must. It's my job in life, and I take that job seriously.
Hush. I'm trying to concentrate. And she was also trying not to laugh at the byplay. Rosalie pictured Ivarian's pale face, his sad silver eyes, and his platinum hair. I wish you would return right now and help me save the past and ensure we both have a future. Rosalie repeated her wish 3 times in case that mattered because it did in the old tales. When she locked in her wish, she threw the rock into the columns of light shining from the glowing circles on the carpet. The rock glowed too now as it sailed into that light. White light blinded her, and she staggered until the backs of her legs hit the couch. Rosalie sat and squinted into the light. Ivarian, are you back?
Chapter 38. My plan is better. How will we do this? Garen tensed as Entali backed away from the cell door so the guard could enter. They didn't discuss their plan, so he wasn't sure what Entali had in mind. Since they were slim, he probably needed to do the heavy lifting, hitting, and probably any carrying too. I just need a signal.
Close the door so no one sees us.
Entali said to the guard in a sultry voice that sent shivers through Garen. Garen kept an idiotic smile on his face and stared at his nose until his eyes crossed, but he could still see the guard coming toward Entali. The demon was just blurry, but definitely facing him, which was the wrong way because the demon would see him coming, and he didn't want him to. Come on, Entali, turn this guy around so his back is to me. Give me the element of surprise. Otherwise, he might not get off the cot and uncross his eyes in time to knock the demon out quickly and quietly. Either Entali knew what he was thinking, or what he was thinking was obvious because they murmured something to the demon and drew close enough to touch him. Jealousy flared up, but Garen squashed it because Entali's powers caused it not a real desire. But they turned the demon, so his back faced the cot. Garen couldn't see how Entali managed that, but he was glad they did because if he had to stare at his nose any longer, he would memorize every pore. When the guard faced the door and the alluring Versati, Garen uncrossed his eyes, retracted his now dry tongue, and slipped quietly off the cot. On silent feet, he crept toward the guard. Now for the moment of truth. Garen dropped into a crouch and swept the demon's legs out from under him. The creature went down, spluttering in anger, and Garen jumped on top of him before the demon realized what was happening. He grabbed the demon's head, but a hand landed on his head, and his body froze.
That's unnecessary. I'll deal with him my way. Now get off him.
Entali flicked their gloved fingers in his general direction. Garen was so surprised he complied. What will you do?
A Versati never tells.
Entali pressed the finger to his lips, and the floor rose to meet him. In his peripheral vision, Entali leaned over, grabbed the guard's head, and then did something. But Garen couldn't see what. A moment later, the guard slumped down into unconsciousness on the floor. What did you do to him? Garen rose unsteadily as the cell spun around him. Why am I so woozy?
I gave him a taste of my powers, and I recharged them a little at his expense. Now stop fooling around and lay him out on the cot.
Entali snapped their gloved fingers. Did you drain me too? Garen staggered over to the downed guard.
Just a little, yes. Don't look at me like that. I had to do something to stop you. Your way would have been too loud, but mine was quieter and better. We don't have all the time in the world. If you want to get out of here, then we need to go now. Grab his keys and let's go.
Entali strode toward the door. Garen dragged the guard away from the door, then patted him down seeking his keys. He found them tucked into a utility belt. What about his clothes? Won't I be too conspicuous dressed like this? Garen waved to his tunic and trousers. They were dusty, bloody, and a bit singed in places.
Yes, but you'll be more conspicuous in the guard's uniform since he's 2 feet taller than you.
That was a good point. Garen took the guard's ring of keys and his truncheon too and headed for the door. He figured a weapon might come in handy during the escape portion of this plan.
Wait.
Entali whispered when he reached for the door handle. They traced their hands over Garen, making him all hot and bothered. What are you doing? Garen tugged Entali's hands away from his manhood. Now really wasn't the time to fondle him, no matter how much he might enjoy that.
What do you think I'm doing? I'm weaving an illusion over you. Now stop squirming and stand still so I can finish.
Entali ran their hands over his back and buttocks before he could say anything at all, and they squeezed both cheeks. Was that really part of the illusion? Garen decided not to ask because it felt nice having someone pressed against him, even if that someone covered themselves in layers of cloth. Are you sure this will work? Won't some demon just see through it?
No, the guards do as little as they can get away with. Besides, no one would dare hinder a Versati for fear that they'd end up seduced, drained, and left to face their superior.
Entali dropped into a crouch and ran their hands down each of his legs, and it was strangely sensual, feeling their hand glide over his skin through the fabric of his trousers. What illusion are you putting on me? Garen asked to distract himself, so he'd stop imagining those long, slim fingers running over other parts of him with no fabric between them.
Anyone who sees you will just see another one of my kind, so just stay close and follow my lead, but keep your eyes downcast and stroll. We don't hurry for any reason.
Entali rose and stepped back to admire their handiwork. When they were satisfied, they caught his hand and tugged him toward the door.
Come on, we've spent too much time here already. Someone will come looking for that guard soon.
Tali pressed their veiled head to the door and listened.
Let's go now before someone comes.
Tali opened the door and slipped out. Garen followed them into the hallway, then remembered to look at the ground. Thankfully, no one was around, so no one saw him out of character. He pulled the door shut and felt for the keys in his pocket.
There's no time. Leave it unlocked.
Tali pulled him down the ramp that spiraled between levels in the spire. As they descended, no one questioned or stopped them. Garen fought the urge to laugh in triumph. This might actually work, and he might escape with the Book of Names. Where's the door to the outside? Garen asked as the cells disappeared, and this new level just had stone walls and nothing else. There must be an exit somewhere nearby on this level or the next one.
Hush, it's further down on another level. You must stay quiet, or someone will hear you.
Tali whispered as they descended to another level. How many levels are there in this place? Garen stopped looking at the ramp and glanced around for clues.
I don't know, but I told you to be quiet, so shut up.
Unfortunately, following directions wasn't one of his skills. Garen was better at giving directions. That's why he was the general, not a foot soldier. But he kept that comment to himself because he could be quiet if he chose. He rarely ever made that choice, though.
Where are you two going?
Someone asked from behind them. Before Garen could glance behind him to see who spoke, Tali tugged his hand to keep him with them and sped up.
It's none of your business, but we're headed back down to our room since our work is done for now.
Tali didn't even spare the speaker a backward glance. Oh, that was so cold.
Then off with you. I'll find someone on duty then.
The demon said as footsteps took the speaker away from them.
You do that, Sandra.
Tali said under their breath, and they emphasized the first part of the demon's name, turning it into a curse. So you two aren't friends? Garen struggled to keep up with Tali. His shoulders were lead weights weighing him down, but it was probably the illusion doing that. He stumbled over his own feet when Tali stopped suddenly.
No, we're not. The exit is this way. Follow me.
Tali dragged him off the ramp and a section of the wall slid aside, revealing the dusky orange plains surrounding the spire. Oh, thank God, because I don't know how much more I could take of this place. Garen relaxed his shoulder muscles as the tension drained out of him. A bright eye-shaped light floated over a dark structure. Was that the Library of Forbidden Knowledge?
Chapter 39. The Gateway Opens. Arginil lifted a crystal that was about the same size as a small pumpkin from the trunk. The gray mist swirling inside it cleared away, revealing an intense violet light. Images of angels he knew formed in his mind as he stared into the light. Scenes of them all in heaven made his heart grow heavy in his chest. There was blonde Corantus walking hand in hand along a beach with the dark-skinned Chantus Shonafar. They faded away, replaced by the deck of a ship and the profile of a smiling, black angel steering the ship through the hammered silver of the sea between the gray between and the lowest level of heaven. Izariah, oh how I miss your stories of ferrying angels and lost souls. How many new ones you must have by now, my dearest friend. But hell trapped Arginil far from the angels he loved. The scene changed again, and a warrior angel in armor watched over a teenage mage with glowing green eyes as he ran through an enchanted forest. Mizraya, so you're now a guardian angel. Arginil laughed at the very idea of such a prickly angel babysitting a mortal. What did you do to earn that dubious honor? He'd never find out, and the thought depressed him as Mizraya faded and other angels took her place. But he glanced away as a hot tear burned its way down his face, carving a wavy line of grief for the angel he was before the fall and the friends he'd lost forever. Arginil closed and locked the trunk, then rose. He didn't come here to reminisce about what he lost. No, he came to fetch something to save the library, and by God, I'll do that. The gateway won't open here, not as long as I exist. Arginil leaped into the air, flew through the broken window, and past the twisted metal shutters. He clutched the clear crystal that now glowed with violet light. It was an old shoe stone, better known as a scrying stone. But unlike other such crystals, the shoe stone imparted visions by channeling divine light, hence its purple glow. What is that? The agent of order asked as it flew over to join him. A shoe stone, but this one fell from heaven with the angels who used it to observe the mortal world and find women to seduce. Arginil tried not to glance at it, but the crystal clasped in his arms kept trying to catch his eye. Images flickered at the periphery of his vision. There was the angel Zamuel strolling through a city of purple spires, and over there, in a shady green glade, the archangel Azrael slept on a hammock just wide enough to fit between his long, graceful wings. That's enough. Please don't show me any more of my friends. My heart can't take it. Have mercy on me. Another tear scalded his cheek as a woman in white replaced Azrael in his mind's eye. She held a red rose in her hands, then let it fall as she also disappeared.
How can that be in hell and still have divine power? This place and everyone in it were cut off from the divine forever as punishment for rebelling.
The agent of order reached for the shoe stone. That's true, but this crystal came here in the hands of the fallen I liberated it from. Nor was it the only artifact from before the fall that he found and hid in the library, but why mention them? It would be better if all the denizens of hell forgot they ever existed. Arginil turned his body away from the metal creature so it couldn't reach the crystal. No one should touch the shoe stone, not even him, but he needed its divine power to draw the gateway away from the library. I hope this works. If it didn't, then he exposed the crystal to anyone watching the library for no reason. Pain shot through his wing as something grabbed it and wrenched it backward. Another bolt of pain slammed into his back, and something yanked him backward toward the library and the gateway above it. No, I can't let it pull me into it. But he couldn't fight it either with one of the anchoring rays attached to his left wing. Arginil curled his body around the scrying stone to protect it and keep any rays from anchoring to it, but it drained him instead.
Hang on. I'm trying to cut through the ray. It would help if I had your sword. Can you manifest it again?
Arginil shook his head. No, I don't think I have enough power left to do that. Another ray struck his shoulder and sent a shockwave of pain through him, and the edges of his vision grayed out. The shoe stone shook in his arms, or maybe it was his arms doing the shaking. It was hard to tell since the gateway spell sucked out his essence in large mouthfuls. In the periphery, a green, sun-drenched glade somewhere under the blue skies of heaven reappeared. A wide-awake archangel fell off a hammock and glanced around as he rose.
Argia?
Hearing his nickname from when he was small tore at his heart. He wasn't that young, naive angel anymore. I wish you were here, my friend. You were always better than me at everything. Arginil couldn't banish the images the shoestone shoved into his mind. Nor did he want to if he were being honest with himself. He'd hungered for news of the angels most dear to him during his long stay in hell, especially Azrael and Azariah. His arms were so heavy, but he couldn't drop the shoestone. And now, at the end, he could see his friends one last time, while the gateway consumed his spiritual body and spun all that he was into itself. He just had one last regret as the gray faces of the repentant ghosts peered out of the walls of the central keep like building within the library's walls. They didn't belong in hell, but none of the relics he found could break through the shield over hell to let them go back to the gray between and eventually on to heaven. I'm sorry I didn't find some way to take you away from here. There would be no second chance for them either if he failed, and that made his soul cry out in anguish.
What trouble are you in now, little angel?
Azrael asked as the archangel appeared in front of him in a blaze of glory. Little? Who are you calling little? I grew up a long time ago. Arginil laughed because he was once a very young angel who followed the archangels around and peppered them with questions. But only Azrael ever answered him.
Did you? Adult angels don't get into trouble, and you look like you're in an awful lot of trouble.
Azrael batted away the glowing ray that charged toward him like it was nothing more than a piece of string. I deserve what I got. This trouble is my making. You should take this with you. It doesn't belong here any more than you do. Arginil uncurled enough to reveal the shoestone, but his arms were too weak and they shook too much to toss it to Azrael. The darned thing was growing heavier the longer he held it. Besides, he wasn't entirely sure where Azrael was within the white and gold nimbus surrounding him. Angels didn't have physical bodies unless they needed to interact with matter, so Azrael was pure spirit right now surrounded by his power, and he was blinding to look at. But Arginil couldn't look away for fear the archangel would turn out to be a cruel trick the shoestone was playing on him.
We can discuss how you got into this situation later. What is that thing floating above us? It looks like an evil eye, and I feel this overwhelming urge to stab it with my sword. But I shouldn't do that until I know what will happen.
Azrael appeared finally when the light surrounding him diminished, so only his violet eyes and his gold halo glowed. His dark hair was cut short, so it just brushed his muscular shoulders. He wore the same white robes all angels wore, but his robes had a gold band at the hem because he was an archangel. No sword hung from his belt, but he could manifest it in his armor whenever he wanted. It's a gateway to where I don't know. I just can't let it open here, and it will when it lands on solid ground. Arginil blinked back the darkness edging his vision. His hands were transparent now, but the shoestone stuck to him like it was glued to him.
Are you trying to move it?
Azrael slapped away another ray that tried to hit his face, and it vanished. Yes, but I can't move it. I'm not strong enough. Arginil closed his eyes.
Of course you're not. Another angel created it, but that one is corrupted.
Arginil crashed into him when the tethers let go. Az wrapped an arm around him before he could fall.
There, I cut the things tying you to the gateway. I'd put you somewhere safe, but that thing is angel-made, and it'll just keep trying to grab you and drain you. It's a bad gateway.
What about you? And where was that agent of order? Arginil glanced around for the creature, but it wasn't anywhere in the sky above the library. Was it hiding from Azrael?
I'm an archangel. It can't touch me.
Azrael dismissed the very idea with a wave, but it'll try. Here, take the shoestone. I'm too weak to hold on to it. Arginil felt around for a pocket. Angel robes weren't like real clothes. They could change to be whatever the wearer needed, and right now, he needed his friend's robe to have a pocket large enough to hold a seeing stone that was the size of a small pumpkin. In the end, he just shoved it into the first pocket his numb fingers found and let the robe figure out how to carry it.
Then let it come for me.
Azrael faced the gateway, and a golden rod appeared in his other hand. He raised it above his head, and the gateway spawned a dozen tethers. They shot toward Azrael, but he just held the rod above his head. As they wrapped around it, the remaining tethers detached from the library's central building and reached for the rod that just came from heaven with its holder.
Where am I taking this thing?
Azrael squeezed him to get his fading attention, but Arginil could only shake his head. I don't know. Just take it away from the library.
At least give me a direction.
Azrael scowled at him.
Come this way.
The woman from before said as she appeared on the cracked plain below them. But Azrael didn't react. Didn't he hear her?
He doesn't because I don't want him to see or hear me. Tell the Archangel to fly this way. The gateway must land in the city.
She pointed toward the silhouette of the tall building some distance away. The edge of the city wasn't far, but its downtown core was. Go that way. Arginil used the last of his strength to raise his arm and point at the city. Why don't you want him to see or hear you? Arginil didn't know if she'd answer, but her answer could be important, especially since he promised to help her. That was before, when there was no way back to those he loved in heaven. Regret bowed his shoulders because he'd probably regret that promise in the end. The lady bowed her head and vanished without answering his question. Was she ashamed that she was in hell? Was that why she didn't want Az to see her? That must be it. Arginil was too drained to feel anything right now except exhaustion creeping over him. No, he refused to close his eyes lest he open them again and discover this was all a dream. But his head was so heavy, he could barely hold it up anymore.
You should rest while I fight with this thing. I've got you, little angel, and I won't let you fall.
Azrael flew slowly and checked often over his shoulder to make sure the gateway followed. With his larger wings, he could just glide toward the city since the air currents flowed that way. You can't catch me. I already fell. Arginil hung his head, and shame made him want to break Azrael's grip so he could fall like the broken thing he was and crawl back to his library. Below, dark buildings stood.
So you say?
Azrael jerked them up and away as the gateway sailed past. That's what happened. Arginil didn't feel like arguing anymore.
So you say?
Was all Az said in that maddeningly calm tone he used when talking to a child. The library was finally safe. Relief swamped Arginil, but it turned to dread when the gateway extruded glowing tethers above and below its central eye, but none shot toward them or the shoe stone. They dug into the ground and the sky above an intersection in a random part of the city. The gateway dropped with a loud thud in the middle of an intersection of several streets, and a shockwave radiated out from it in all directions. What did the gateway find to grab onto in the city? Was there some divine relic there? Arginil tried to remember if he ever searched that neighborhood before. But an invisible wall of pure force slammed into him and scattered his thoughts as it threatened to break Azrael's grip on him. I should fall. I deserve nothing else. Arginil closed his eyes and let gravity do what it must. His spirit might shatter on impact into 1,000 pieces because he wasn't strong enough to hold himself together anymore. He was tired of existing, and the library was safe now. It would be better off without him.
Stop trying to slide out of my grip. I'm not telling Azariah I dropped you. I'm not that brave.
Azrael firmed his grip on him. Hearing that warmed Arginil, but he didn't deserve such care. Azariah should forget about him and live his best life in heaven, far away from here. Oh, Az, I'm not the angel you knew anymore. I haven't been him for a long time. A hot tear scorched its way down his face, carving a fresh path of shame and regret.
Chapter 40. Saved by Trees. When the light faded, Avarian hung upside down from his captor's grip. Trees towered over him, and their branches shifted, making them look like bark-covered giants waking from a deep sleep. A metal hand squeezed his ankle as the ground sailed away inches from his nose. The agents of chaos stood on 4 legs that ended in metal hooves. Its human-like torso was a mix of churning gears and jagged metal plates formed by tiny metal insects that were themselves made of interlocking gears. Where are we? Avarian asked. They were obviously in the enchanted forest somewhere in Shayari, but it was a big country, and they could be anywhere in it. But the more pressing question was, when were they? How far back in time did the agents of chaos take them? The agents of chaos veered right to avoid a branch shooting toward it, and the branch struck the ground instead.
We're right where we need to be.
The metal centaur pointed to a bright light blossoming in the sky. Avarian stared at it. Am I imagining it, or does the light resemble an eye? Clouds spun above the strange light. As it expanded, it shot out glowing white rays, and they slammed into the enchanted trees the agents of chaos swerved to avoid. Unease curled around Avarian's gut and squeezed. He had a terrible feeling about that gateway ripped open among the stars. But before he could demand answers, a branch whipped toward them. The agents of chaos swerved, and the branch struck the earth instead. What is that bright thing in the sky? Avarian shivered as cold dread clenched his gut. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't anything good.
A gateway.
The agents of chaos said for once in perfect unison before a branch slammed into the metal centaur's head and shattered it, sending thousands of metal insects flying in all directions. Avarian covered his head as the metal hand around his ankle let go. He fell until a branch wrapped around his waist and plucked him out of the air. Nice tree, please put me down. He patted the branch around his waist as gratitude swamped him. Then he stared at the silver bark under his hand. Only one tree in the enchanted forest had silver bark, and he raised his gaze to regard her, the queen of all trees. She glowed white from her lacy roots to the silver leaves on her graceful boughs. My queen, Evarian breathed in awe, recognizing the ancient queen of his country. Relief and gratitude washed over him. If the queen of all trees joined this fight, then the agents of chaos couldn't do what they came here to do. Evarian dropped to his knees in front of her after she lowered him to the ground. "Thank you for saving me, my queen," he said as he bowed his head, then tensed at the sound of footsteps. Someone was coming this way. Was that good or bad? Should I interact with the locals? They could tell me where I am, but probably not when I am. Evarian racked his brain, but he couldn't remember what his mother had said about that. Could I do more harm than good if I talked to whoever is coming this way?
Wait, Papa, I have questions and you're not answering them.
A child said, and he sounded cross and a little like Rand. But that's impossible. I left Rand in the future with Rosalie. Just thinking about them sent a bolt of jealousy through his heart, but he squashed it because that was his fault. He was the one who left her there. Evarian stared as Rand burst through the foliage, carrying a scowling miniature copy of himself. But Rand's eyes don't glow green and he doesn't have a scar on the left side of his face. Oh my God, am I looking at Rand and his father? Evarian's mouth dropped open, and shock stole his words for a moment. The resemblance was uncanny.
Look, it's the queen tree. Hi there.
The child waved at the queen of all trees, and she lifted a branch and waved back. Rand's father bowed his head in respect, but he didn't kneel because he held on to a squirming child who might be 4 or 5. Rand was a big child, but that made sense since he was tall as an adult. His father must be around 20 at the most, but he didn't look like it. I should have asked Rand what his father's name is, but Evarian didn't because he didn't think he would ever meet the man without Rand there to introduce him. This is so awkward. What should I do? Well, for starters, he could get up. Evarian rose awkwardly and stood there, uncertain what to do. Should I introduce myself? Wouldn't Rand have known me if I had sensed this already happened when I met him? God, this time travel thing was so confusing. That was why he wanted to avoid it.
Hey, who are you?
Asked the child, who must be Rand, and he waved at Evarian, making it clear who he meant.
And what are you doing in the forest?
That's a great question. I was just... Evarian stopped talking, because what could he say that wouldn't sound insane? Who are you, and why are you in the forest? Evarian asked. He hoped this child version of Rand was as talkative as his adult self. If he was, then Rand would go off on a tangent soon and forget all about his question.
Oh, I'm Rand and this is Papa, but you can't call him that because he's my Papa, not yours. You'll have to get your own Papa because I don't share.
Rand shook his finger at Evarian as he delivered that stern warning. Despite everything that happened to him, Evarian laughed from his belly, and it felt good to laugh again. If I can't call him Papa, then what should I call him?
Oh, that's easy. Papa's name is Sarn. You can call him that.
Rand patted his father's shoulder, but Sarn just shook his head. Perhaps his son introduced him that way all the time. Sarn pointed at the sky.
What is that thing?
Green light leaped out of his hand and arched over them. Evarian turned in time to see the metal centaur slam into the glowing green dome over them and bounce off it. Wow, Rand wasn't kidding. His father was powerful. Is that a shield? Evarian waved to the glowing dome over them.
Yes, Papa casts lots of shields. He's very good at that.
Rand wrapped his arms around his father's neck and rested his head on his shoulder.
I'm glad you approve.
Sarn had a dry sense of humor unlike his son, but he smiled at the boy before turning back to Evarian, and he reminded him of his own father.
What was that thing? I didn't get a good look at it.
I don't honestly know, and he really didn't want to talk about it. Evarian stared at his boots. What do I do now? I can't leave the agents of chaos here. Who knows what damage they'll do? The queen of all trees slid backward as if struck by an invisible force. But how could anything strike her under the shield? The bright eye-shaped light in the sky shot rays out of it, and some slammed into the shield over them. Green shards fell as the shield shattered, but all the shards merged into a ball of green light that slammed into Rand's father. He didn't even react to it, so that must happen a lot. A ray pierced the queen of all trees bark, connecting her to the giant eye-shaped light falling toward them, and her glow dimmed. Was that thing draining her? No. Evarian screamed at the same time as Sarn, but only Rand's father had the power to do anything about it.
Do something, Papa. Help the queen tree.
Rand tugged on his father's tunic to get his attention again.
I'm trying, but my magic has no effect on it.
Rand's father said. Another glowing thread shot toward them. Rand's father dodged it.
Come on, we must get away from here.
Rand's father extended his hand. Was this how he died? Evarian backed away, picturing the adult Rand he knew in his bottomless grief. I can't do it. I won't be the reason you die.
What are you talking about?
Sarn backed away, shocked by his statement. Evarian cursed himself for saying that aloud. No one should know when they die. Get away from here. Please live, not just for your son's sake, but for all our sakes. Only you can save us. White light wrapped around Evarian, blinding him, and somehow he heard Rosalie's voice.
I wish you would return right now and help me save the past and ensure we both have a future.
She wanted him to come back. The thought warmed his heart, and he felt lighter than air, like he could just float away on the breeze. White light blinded him as it reached for him. Would it carry him away from the agents of chaos and their plans? Evarian stood there, torn between staying here to save the queen of all trees and Rand's father and returning to Rosalie. but what could he do to help either one? Nothing, because he wasn't really a mage, and his power had no offensive or defensive capabilities at all. He could just go backward in time, and that's it. Ivarian clenched his fists in frustration. I can't save them, but maybe I can help Rosalie and Ran in the future. He closed his eyes and let the light carry him back to the one person he wished he had more time with. Before the light could take him away, articulated metal fingers wrapped around his throat.
Oh no, you don't. You can't escape us, Time Walker.
No, you can't do this. Ivarian tried to pry the metal creature's fingers away from his neck.
Yes, we can. We are chaos, and where we go, pestilence follows.
The agents of chaos said as the world turned white. I'm sorry, Ran and Rosalie, I'm bringing the enemy with me. Brace yourselves. Ivarian hoped Ran's wish magic was a match for the agents of chaos, otherwise they were all in deep trouble.
You've been listening to Part 9 of Gateway to Hell, Book 1 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Cassira. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the next part publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback and soon, a full-cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.